Well, as I said, the hippie life was aided by the fact there was no problem with money. Everyone had money. A couple of years later, everything got expensive, but in those days, we were living in a kind of financial paradise. And there was this tremendous acceptance of all kinds of different people and so on. But after everybody cleared out and left town, I was all alone in this 10-room house. Somehow I'd ended up with this place. And I was walking down the street one day, and there's this beautiful redhead walking side by side with me and flashing these beautiful teeth at me, and she was just exquisite. So I took her home for coffee, and then she took me over to a girlfriend's house. And then she took me home. She had a little studio nearby, and got me down on she had a fleecy rug, a lambskin rug. Oh, yeah. Got me down there and got me to make love to her, and then got me to give her first yoga lesson. By then, she'd found out that I'd learned yoga at Club Med in Agadir. And you are my yoga teacher. It wasn't like, please teach me yoga, right? Now, I want my lesson now. So all the time I was living this rather fun hippie life, my body was going through these transformations. I was just teaching her. And my first teacher had used the same exact words every lesson, which I thought was a little stupid at the time, but I realized later it made it easy for me to pass it on to her. And she surpassed me. She turned into a person with one body in a million. She was really a natural student, but it was the desire of the student creates the teacher. And I get up and look in the mirror every morning and go, whoa, I didn't look like that yesterday. It was like someone was sculpting my body, like it was made of clay or plastic, and every day I look better. You know, I was a young man still. I was about 31 or 32, but my goodness, I was just changing as if I were being sculpted by Leonardo da Vinci or something like that. Just extraordinary. So we got engaged. I was quite in love with Jeanette and so on. But, you know, she was into spotless dwellings, you know, and it didn't fit in too well with the hippie thing, right? I mean, her sister was already married in the apartment. You could have gone through with a microscope and not found a speck of dust. And I noticed when Jeanette took me home to her family in Quebec, there was not 1 inch of the house that had the mark of her dad. It was woman's world, man, you know, like that woman had everything, right? And so that kind of got me a little nervous. But what broke us up finally, she got mad at me one weekend and went and slept with a flight attendant or something while she was on a trip. She was a stewardess, right? So that I couldn't deal with that. So we got unengaged and so on, all right? And but that big love affair had started me being a yoga teacher. And even when she had left, I went on doing. By then I kind of was launched. And then people can see that you know yoga, you know, and so on. And in fact, it was wonderful. On the island, when I got out to John's place, I got the cabin built. And while I was building the cabin, they had a goose, actually a gander called Mr. Goose, and 3 females. And everyone was afraid of him. Because a gander can knock out all your teeth with his arm, you know, with his elbow, if he wants. And he'd bite all the girls in the ass. At night they come out to pee in the yard and he'd bite them in the ass, right? He had everybody terrified. And I don't know if you ever had to deal with a flock of geese, but they get pretty aggressive. They're fearless, right? So everyone was afraid of this guy. But I'd be doing my yoga out on my sleeping bag, climb out of my tent, put out a sleeping bag. I'd get into the lotus position. And when he saw the lotus position, he'd come over. Now, we were all afraid of him, you got to understand. He'd come over and get up on my lap. And then his neck would turn into a big question mark, and all the feathers would stand out from his neck. And he'd start to tressellate. Sitting on my lap. And I'm sitting there terrified that he's going to knock all my teeth out, right? Because he's got his wing right at the level of my teeth. Would you please get off? Would you please get off, Mr. Goose? And finally he'd get off and walk away. But he could not see me in the lotus without coming and sitting on my lap. It's the funniest thing. When he always had his females following him around, 3 white females, and they go, what? Look at Mr. Goose sitting on his lap. It was the funniest scene in the world, right? So we were awful happy out on that island. And then when I got the cabin built, well, I'll tell you one other thing typical. We're going to have at the end of the summer, we're going to have a wedding. And I was in the kitchen, a teapot house, with the bride. And her little belly was already rounded out. She was a couple months pregnant. And she was having a sponge bath in the kitchen, and I was having a peanut butter sandwich, and she was stark naked. And I thought, how many tribes on the earth do you get to see the bride stark naked, right? The night before the wedding. Okay, so that was hippie life, I'll tell you, right? That was one aspect of it. We didn't care. Nobody cared. You could take your clothes off. And there was a real welcoming kind of thing. I think I might have told you this, but on the night of the wedding, someone had been in Vancouver saying, there's a wedding on Lasqueti, and so everyone showed up. We had 50 extra guests who just come out from Vancouver to see what the hell was happening. And there were 2 heavies sitting on the veranda of the porch of the cabin that I'd rebuilt, and it was now perfectly rebuilt. And one of them, they had chains on and leather and tattoos galore and heavies, right? And I was sitting with them. And I thought, gee, this could be trouble, just a natural reaction. And no one knew who these guys were. And then just then one of the 6 fellows came over out of the house. He came over. He says, hey, where are you guys from? And the big guy says, oh, we just got out of prison. And Dennis says, wow, right? And it's genuine, right? It's not like, oh, like this, like me. This is the real hippie spirit. Wow, that's going to make it even more fun. And he meant it, right? So that was the hippie spirit, you understand? You could come out of jail, you were welcome. No one, the more the merrier, Everybody was welcome. And then one of the guys was big and one was skinny, Laurel and Hardy kind of couple. And I went to bed finally in the cabin around 1 in the morning. I couldn't take any more. And they were laughing and shouting. And then around 2 in the morning I wake up and I hear this little pipsqueak voice, non-stop. And I realized after a few minutes it was a little guy in leathers, right, who'd been in jail. And I think we kind of pulled the plug, like he hadn't said anything for 3 or 4 years, right? And he got to this place and everyone accepted him, nobody was going to beat on him, and the guy just, and he just said, like he just bubbled like champagne. I'll never forget that. So that was the real sense. It wasn't the costumes and that. People didn't wear costumes, but anyone was welcome. It was just amazing. And when the Darwins didn't have any room for me anymore, oh, I got room for you. Come down the other end of the island. It was like that on Lasqueti. I got a room. We'll find you a room. Come and stay with us. That was the hippie life. So.
And then you decided to leave Lasqueti at one point.
Well, yeah, I fell in love with a girl. That's a long story. I don't know if we'll put that on public view. But anyway, she finally took off and left me with a cat and no more firewood, right?
San Francisco and...
Well, this was how I got to San Francisco when I ran out of firewood on Lasqueti. I had a little family for a while, so I lost my little family. And Lasqueti is beautiful in the summer when there's berries on the bushes, but in the winter you got to have a good stack of firewood and a lot of books to read. And it's raining all day long, and the roads are all mud this deep. And yeah, it's not as nice. And I said to a girlfriend in pen pal in San Francisco, I said, send me the want ads from the San Francisco paper. Maybe I'll get a free ticket for a job interview, which she did, and then I did. And next thing I knew, I was in San Francisco at a job interview. I got a free flight down, round trip ticket. And then, to everyone's astonishment, I got hired by these people. And I didn't even want the job particularly, but they were paying the highest salary for programmers I'd ever seen. It was, I forget what it was in those days, dollars, but it was like $100,000 a year, basically. We paid the highest salary for programmers in the world, and they had just hired me. Okay, so and I was back in the real world too. I'd been living out on this island, you know, and like a lumberjack and so on. And now I'm back into reality again. And the guy says to me, "I need someone who can code 800 lines a day. Can you do that?" You know. How do I know you're going to work out in this job with all I'm paying you? I said, "You can't know. You're going to have to hire me, aren't you? Find out if I can do the job." I was, you know, that relaxed. So it was 100 hours a week, no pay for overtime. So it worked out to something like minimum wage time plus 10% or something by the time you put in all the hours. It was horrible. I worked day and night. And I actually, my friend out there who'd sent me the newspaper, she found me a girlfriend overnight. I moved in with this girl, had a beautiful house in Berkeley. But I had to commute, you know, into the city from her place, and by the time I get home to her place, it'd be 1 in the morning, she'd be asleep.
What year was this?
71, I guess it was.
1971.
Yeah. And, yeah, 71 in the spring. So by the time I get home, she'd be asleep. So I think I lived with her a couple of weeks, but I think we hardly said a word, you know. She just shared her bed, basically, gave me a place to crash, but she was never awake when I was home, and so on. And it was terrible. We'd go out to the airport where the computer was and stay the whole weekend out there till we got everything working and done. And at the first employees meeting, if I'd been a doctor, I'd have put 7 out of 10 of those guys in the hospital. I mean, their eyes were not touching their eyelids, and you know, they were staring at the walls. They were worked to death, and I was one of them, you know. So finally, at the end of the month, but I learned one great thing working at RAND telepressing. One of my fellow workers said to me, "Make your needs known, Shayne." Very important, right? Make your needs known. That was every time you get a job, you learn a new little principle of life, right? You need something, tell people, and so on. So that was a good lesson there. But finally, one day, Nahum Rand calls me in and he says, "You know," he says, "you're not really shaping up like the others. You're not working hard enough, Shayne." I said, "I put in 100 hours last week. You want to see my time sheet?" He says, "Yeah, but the others are putting in more. You're going to have to work more, or we're going to have to declare this a mismatch." I said, "Mismatch?" So he writes me up my severance pay, and he says, "Where are you going now?" I said, "I'm going to Europe." "What are you going to Europe for?" "They all come back. Everything you want in Europe is right here. You don't have to go to Europe, right? You've already reached paradise." And I said, "Well, we'll see." And that was the last time I lived in the States for a fair amount of time. And off I went. And I bought a one-way ticket to Europe.
From San Francisco.
Yeah.
Where'd you stop at?
Oh, and I stopped at Chicago where I had family, and I think maybe St. Louis where I had a friend, and then I stopped in Washington, I had a friend there, and Florida, saw my aunt down there, and then I went to Boston, right? So this ticket ate up every penny I had, you see. But by now, I'd become a yogi in the sense my body looked so good, people would ask me to teach them yoga. And I'd been saying, until now, I can't teach yoga because I can't do the lotus. I figured if you can't do the lotus, you can't be a yoga teacher. I don't know if that's written down anywhere, but it was written in my head. And about this time, I could do the yoga.
So
I could do the lotus.
you were ready to become a
So I
yoga
thought, yeah, and I have these strange hunches all my life. I kind of always know the future. And I stopped in Canada, my last stop, and a friend put me on the airport and gave me an envelope with $20 in it. Joe Reed, again, my filmmaker friend. He gave me $20 and said, what are you going to do in Europe? And I said, I'm going to be a teacher at the Club Med. And I hadn't even thought of it till then, what I was going to do. But I do remember, before I left Montreal, right when I decided to go out to the West Coast and give up, I took an acid trip. And during the acid trip, I was doing yoga. And I was really enjoying it, and I'd really gotten good by that time. And I thought, this is what I should be doing for a living, you know? This is what I should be doing, is teaching yoga. And then I saw it then. I knew I was going to do it then. And I was in that wonderful posture where you're on your knees and you just keep leaning back further and further with your body like a washboard, right? Until you get down. Feels so good, and it pulls every muscle in the front of your body. Turns you into a powerhouse, you know, wonderful.
But before you went to Europe, you made a stop in Boston, right?
Yeah.
So then you made a stop in Boston before going
Yeah,
there.
well, leaving San Francisco, I had a one-way ticket stopping everywhere.
Right.
And by the time I got to Boston, I was down to $100 or a couple $100. And I stopped at Martini Carl's, which is a dream of a clothing shop in Boston, where I get into elegant phases in my life. And you know how you look in 10 shops, you can't find what you want.
Yeah.
In Martini Carl, you want everything. Everything in your size is just what you would have bought yourself. Great buyers. So just out of, you know, nostalgia, I had no money left, but I went by and they had white turtlenecks on sale, white cotton turtlenecks. And I bought one or two, and I got 3 or 4 compliments that day. Everyone thought I looked good in this. So the next day I went back to get some more. I bought 10 more. They were like $3 a piece or something. Incredible. And so now I had shirts for the next 10 years. And in fact, I wore them for 10 years. And they also had zebra striped socks, and I got 10 pair of those. And wore those. Yeah, I wore those because I always have trouble with the colors of my socks because I'm colorblind. Black and white socks you can't miss, right? So I wore black and white striped socks and these white turtlenecks for the next 10 years. Anyway, when going out the door from buying my turtlenecks, I look up and there's 2 sleeveless suits in the window, suits, right? Sleeveless suits, and I thought, what a wonderful idea, because I was very athletic now, you know, I was doing yoga every day. And, you know, in a suit, as soon as you get your arm up to here, it's holding your arm down. I thought, what a wonderful idea. You still got all the pockets and everything, but your arms are free. So, and they were black and white checks and brown and yellow checks. I mean, big checks. Like they looked like they were made out of chessboards, okay?
Wow.
And I went running back in. Now, I will admit I'd had something to smoke, but that's nothing unusual in my life. So I went back in, and I said, it says marked down from $297 to $29.90, right? How can that be? That's 10 to 1, right? And Mr. Carl said, he said, that's legitimate, Mr. Nelson. That's Louis Taylor's in New York. He says they're a very good house, and they just went out of business, and we picked up all the remnants, and we're just doing them a favor. And he says they're both your size. I said I'll take them both, right, for $30 a piece. He says yes, but we have to tailor them for you. We can't let them go out of here. So come back tomorrow, okay? So they're included in the $30. I'm getting tailoring. And remember, I now had the most beautiful body I'd ever had in my life, right? I looked like a Greek god, but from the yoga, from all those, I didn't have an ounce of fat and so on. And what's unusual about yoga is both sides of the body are equally developed. Only swimming and yoga do that generally. It's usually, and you have that little more muscle on the right with the yoga body. And here I was. So the next day, I'm on the way to Europe, or to Montreal anyway, and I jump a cab, go pick up all my suits, go to the airport, go in the men's room.
Logan Airport?
Yeah, and I go in the men's room, and I've got my 3-piece suit on, the Wallachs from my days, from IBM, from years before, okay? Probably a 5 or 6 year old suit. It would last forever, this thing anyway, right? And plus it was a little smelly by now because I've been working in it for a month and hadn't had it cleaned, okay? So I strip it all off, I put on a white turtleneck, I put on my black and white check sleeveless suit, okay? And I had long hair. It was turning white, okay? And big black boots, right? With the black and white striped socks. And black and white checked, form-fitted, tailored suit, okay? And the white arms sticking out. So I step out of the men's room. It's right there in the terminal. It's right in this particular terminal. It's right there in the terminal. And about, I don't know, 700-800 people start staring at me. They stop whatever they're doing, and they're all looking at me. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience of having 700 people stare at you just for your clothes. And I just froze, you know, like, what am I going to do? And I really came close to going back in and getting my old business suit, you know. But I had stood there and said, you're not a businessman. You're not IBM. You're not a programmer. You're an artist. You're a writer. You're a dramatist. You're a singer. You're everything else. You're no longer a businessman. So that was the turning point in my life, you see. And then I get over to the airline line, and everybody steps aside. And the girl goes, can I help you, sir? It's like I'm some celebrity or something, right? No, yes, come up. So I jump the line too, right? It's unbelievable, just because of these clothes. And then I get on the plane and I'm looking out the window, and the stewardess said, would you like a drink, madam? Because, you know, only women wear sleeveless stuff, right? But how I love those suits.
Yeah, beautiful.
Oh. And they were brocaded. They weren't printed. They weren't printed square.
Incredible.
Every one of them was brocaded. Every one of them with the right color, matching silver thread and so on. They were exquisite suits. You know, he was right. This Louis Brothers or whatever. So I dressed only in those. You know, but they were embarrassing to some people. You know, just walking around with me. It was like it's a circus act.
And the flight was going from Boston to Paris directly?
Well, this was to Montreal, right?
Oh,
so
right.
I stopped in Montreal, but then that's where my friend asked me, what are you going to do in Europe? And I said, I'm going to teach yoga at the Club Med. I knew it. I don't know how I know things like that, but I do it. So off we go. But they wouldn't let me into England in that suit, right?
You're kidding. Did you land in Heathrow?
No, I was up in Manchester, Birmingham, one or the other. I think Birmingham.
I wouldn't let you in.
No, I had no money on me, right? I had $20 on me, and they said, you can't come into England with $20. I said, well, then I'll go into France. They said, you won't get into France without any money. And I said, how do you mean I always get into France? Oh, now things have changed. The French will throw you out, and you'll end up back here with us, and we're stuck with you. And then they kept me there for hours. So, and this guy came through whistling A Wandering Minstrel from Gilbert and Sullivan, in which they taught us in junior high school. I knew what they were laughing at me. You know. And so while I'm sitting there, I had nothing to do. I wrote an article, Welcome to England, okay, because I thought this was a pretty awful way to welcome someone. And I was a writer then, so I wrote an article on it. And finally they got a hold of a friend of mine, and he said, he's an eminent American dramatist. And they said, yeah, he's got no money, right? Either you sign for him or we're not going to let him in. He said, oh, all right, I'll sign for him. So they let me in, right? So the next day I was with Michael and his mother-in-law and his wife up at Carnarvon, which, you know, the Prince of Wales, that's his castle. And we're walking down a quaint little street, and I see the Carnarvon Times. I said, I'm going to sell my article and get us enough money for lunch for the four of us. And I ran up the steps and went up to the first floor, found the editor, showed him the article I'd written, Welcome to England, right? And he read it. He said, I'll buy it if I give you £5. I said, you got to give me enough for 4 lunches. He said, I'll give you £5. You can have a sandwich. And I sold it right there. And I was published in the Carnarvon Times, Carnarvon Herald.
Welcome to England.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they changed the name to Welcome to Wales.
And then you went down to France from there?
Yeah, then, well, finally when I went over to France, I went in some trepidation because the British had assured me I wouldn't get past
Take a
it.
train and then a ferry, or what?
No, I flew.
Oh.
I had a stop. I bought that one-way ticket all the way to Paris.
All right.
Yeah. Where all my money went. They charge a lot for that kind of ticket. So I get to Paris, and I mean, I've got nothing now, and I'm in Orly, and it's 9 o'clock at night. And I'll never forget Orly, because I hadn't been in Paris for a while. In Orly, they have one long counter, and every counter there's a girl with her face like this, holding up her head, right? I'll never forget that. There's been 45 women sitting the length of Orly with their head and their chin in their hands, the poor things, at 9 at night. So I call the Hotel Stella where I always stayed. Hey, Danielle. Danielle's not here. When's he coming back? He's not coming back. Oh my God. Well, I need a room. We're closed. We're painting. Bye. Hangs up. Now I'm out at Orly with $19.50, right? And I still don't have a room. So sometimes I come up with a good idea, and I call them back. And I said, look, I love the smell of paint, right? Get them laughing, right? I love the smell of paint. I love ladders in my room, It brings me good luck. I mean, why don't you just let me have one of those rooms you're painting, right? And the guy laughed. He says, okay, I'll wait for you. So I get a room. And I have no dough. So I sold my camera at the flea market right away for $100 and some bucks, so I got my room paid for. And every day I get up and say, you gotta go to the Club Med, gotta go to the Club Med, and the other side of my head says, no. Every day. Gotta go to the Club Med? No. Come on. Gotta go, no. Like that, day after day after day, and I got no money, I got nothing. And I said, oh well, I'll borrow some money off my friends. I didn't dare. So I had no metro tickets. I'm walking miles to I'm getting invitations from my friends, fortunately. Walking miles, but I got no metro tickets, nothing. And then, I don't know, it must have been 25 days. I was sitting there in the hotel, paralyzed by fear or whatever. And I wake up in the morning, got to go down to the Club Med today. The other side of the brain says, yeah, today's the day. Right. Oh, okay. So I put on my suit and I go down there.
The harlequin suit.
Yeah, with a white turtleneck, right, brush my hair. And harlequin suit. And I go down there and I have to walk over to the Club Med. I don't have any metro tickets left. I go in, I say, well, who's giving jobs in yoga, 7th floor, do. I go up there, he's on the phone trying to buy an apartment, a maid's room. When he finally gets off the phone, he says, yes, what can I do for you? I said, I'm your next yoga teacher. So he says, oh, well, that's interesting, but I don't need a yoga teacher. I got all my yoga teachers. Right? So I just stood there. And he looked at me. He says, well, and I was thinking, I didn't say anything. I think, it was strange. I know they got a job for me. And just then, this girl comes walking in and puts down a telex in front of him on the page. She said, you got a telex, dude. And he said, excuse me a minute. Oh, I do need a yoga teacher. You ever been to Tahiti? Think of that, Dan. I knew he needed the yoga teacher before he knew he needed a yoga teacher. And then to show you how stupid I could be, I said, I'm not going to Tahiti. I I just got offered a job in Tahiti, right? Surrounded by beautiful girls in bikini. I turned it down. I don't want to go to Tahiti. He says, what's wrong with you? I said, nothing wrong with me. It's American women in the club there. I know 90% of the guests are American. I don't want to spend my life with Americans. I've had enough Americans. Send me to a European club. He says, all right. It's very hard in the European clubs, but I'll send someone else to Tahiti, and off he did. And sent me, and he said hard, that meant sick. You will get sick.
Is that right?
And yeah, they got good and sick.
Where did he ended up sending you?
Agadir.
You went to Agadir.
Yeah.
This was in 70.
No, that was my first trip. This was to Djerba La Douce. Djerba on the island of lotus eaters. Yeah. It was hell in the summer.
Huh.
Water was like bath water.
Pretty warm, huh?
Couldn't move. No aircon.
So what happened? You went back to the Stella, you checked out, did your thing, and then you went off to
I like in these little stories to put in some lessons, right? I'd been a tour guide in America, and I said one time to my mentor, teacher, Mr. Burton, a very nice Russian gentleman of about 70, I said, why do we get people up at 7 in the morning? The flight's at noon, we don't have to get people up. I have to get them so early to the airport. He said, my boy, the first time you have a flat on the way to the airport, you'll know the answer to that one, okay? Plus, there's always things to do at an airport. People don't mind. So when the Club Med, when they hired me, they gave me a convocation, show up at the airport at 11. So I get out, or at 6 in the evening, whatever. I get out to the airport an hour earlier. I get down to the charter area, there's nobody. I look at the ticket, I'm in the wrong airport. I run upstairs, where's the buses to Charles de Gaulle, right, over there. I go over there, you got a bus going to Charles de Gaulle? The guy says, yeah, it doesn't run very late. In fact, the last one just left, right? Look, there he goes, right? And it's on the other side of the parking lot. I go, oh my God. And he looks at me and he goes, wait a minute. He goes, shh, and he whistles like a locomotive. And this thing's so far you can barely see it. Boom, I see the brakes go on. Guy swings by and picks me up. So I have a nickel on me, right? Nothing. So I said to him, I'll pay you at the end of the trip. So there's 3 people on the bus. And I go around begging him, can I do a portrait of you for €8, right? I was a pretty good sketch artist by then, No. So I get to the airport and I tell the driver, I'll have to send you the money, He says, get out of here. Have a good trip in the Club Med, he said, right? So I got a free ride back. But that's the moral of the story. Take an extra hour going to any airport, boy, because you can get some real surprises.